Kid 2 ran away. What's your story? Story 1. It was 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, and I ran away to my older sister's house out of state. My mom was extremely abusive, physical and emotional, and told me that as soon as I turned 18 she was going to burn all my belongings. She made sure to mention my driver's license, birth certificate, and social security card, and kick me out into the streets. She already stole all my money, since I wasn't legally old enough to have my own bank account. Every month when I got paid, so I knew if she burned all my belongings I'd be ruined. I ran away while she went on vacation and took what belongings I could fit into my friend's car. I cashed out what money I had left in my account, less than $400, and hid at my sister's place in the meantime. My mom lied to the police and told them I was 16 years old, a drug addict, suicidal, and that I ran away with my 32-year-old boyfriend, who was an armed drug dealer. The police found me 4 days before my birthday and tackled me to the asphalt, assuming I was armed. They were very angry when they booked me and found out I was almost 18 and clearly not on drugs or with any old man. Legally, they had to send me back to live with my mother, so I stayed in custody for 3 days and was about to be transported back to her, but thankfully turned 18 before that happened. Turns out all the belongings I left behind were indeed burned, and my driver's license was suspended, since parents can legally do that to minors. Thank God I managed to save all the important things before she got her hands on them. I'm now 27, married, and pregnant. I went to so much therapy to work through all the trauma I experienced as a child, and luckily managed to create a happy and successful life for myself. I haven't spoken to her since I ran away. I've seen her randomly over the years, like at my grandma's funeral, my little sister's high school play, and when I helped that same little sister move out of that awful house when she turned 18. I don't plan on including her in my life. Ever. Story 2. I am 16 years old. Lived with my dad, and after years of emotional abuse, he snapped and grabbed me by the throat. I can't remember much more. On autopilot, I took my wallet, phone, and charger and just left. I didn't really have an idea of where to go, so I felt my best chances were to go to the train station and see from there on. I got a response from a friend in another city where I could stay and wanted to leave town since I was scared and had the feeling the police were searching for me. They were. I had like 40 euros, and to save money I decided to walk instead of taking the bus. Maybe the best movie moment out of my life is walking along a long straight road with water next to it. We just have had a few hot summer days, and while the sun was going down, thunderstorms rolled in. Adrenaline worn off and I realized I had pain and was limping. Headache, dizzy, but also an overwhelming feeling of liberation. It started to rain and I realized my F up for not taking my coat. I only wore a t-shirt and it was getting cold. In the distance, I saw a bus stop with one person waiting. Good, the last bus hasn't left yet. I must have looked like crap, 'cause the guy, like 40 years, waiting there started talking to me. I told him what happened, and he said he already felt weird energy around me. He offered a place to sleep, but I refused because, yeah, old guy, teenage girl, it felt weird. I refused and he understood. We smoked pot together. He paid for my bus ticket and exchanged numbers. I always regretted not taking the offer, but that's another story. The next day we hung out, and he bought food for me. I decided to contact friends who were worried and promised them to come back. This story will always stay with me. It kickstarted major changes in my life, still affecting me today. I stood up for myself. Story 3. When I was in high school, I lived with my dad after I moved from where I grew up because my mom wanted to move. My mom lived about an hour's drive away. This is relevant later. My dad started dating this woman who was extremely abusive. Unfortunately, he and I are a lot alike in the way that we both are easily manipulated. She and I got into a fight one night because she accused me of telling everything that was going on to my mom, whom I hadn't spoken to in months due to drugs. She slapped me across the face hard enough that her fake-ass nails actually cut me as well. I pushed her over the coffee table and walked out. It was about midnight, so I didn't want to bother my friends. I walked about 4 miles before I got to the overpass of the interstate, where I stopped to sleep a bit. The next day, I walked the rest of the way to my mom's house, which took about 10 hours. When I got to my mom's house, she was strung out. So I just turned around and left. I walked the 5 hours to Walmart and hung out for another 6 or 7 hours. And then I guess someone at Walmart had spoken to the cops that had stopped in, and they stopped to talk to me. When they got my name and called it in, apparently my dad had told his friend, who was an officer that happened to be called by the neighbors following the fight the night before. So they asked about the cuts on my face, and I told them. And they asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no, because I didn't want my dad to be mad at me. They took me back, and it turns out that my dad kicked her out of the house immediately after I left, and he spent the whole night trying to find me himself. It made me proud of him, because the first time he actually showed some backbone in a relationship was because of me. Story 4. Happened when I was 16. My mother was abusive for so many years. I'd had a terrible few weeks. A friend of mine had died in a car crash. Another friend had been diagnosed with cancer and was going to lose his leg, and I'd been dealing with my parents arguing every day. The police being called to our house nightly, and the pressure of upcoming exams. One night I was home alone with my mom, and I had come downstairs to get some water because I had a headache from crying. My mom stood at the bottom of the stairs and told me that she hoped my friend with cancer would die during the operation. So after years of just putting up with her abuse, I snapped a little and started punching and kicking at her chest, me being a few steps up from her. Obviously, this was a bad idea on my part. I got beaten quite badly. Mom then went out. I don't really remember what happened immediately after, but I remember that an hour or so later I was sitting on my bed knitting with blood running down my face and arms onto the yarn. It's a weird thing to remember. I'm pretty sure I was quite deeply in shock, and my mind had just decided to pretend nothing was wrong for a while. Anyway, after this my sister had come home and had taken me to my aunt's house, where they took pictures of all the injuries in case I wanted to go to the police. I stayed there for a night, but felt like a nuisance, so the next night I told them that I was going to stay with a friend. Instead, I went down to a local park and stayed there at night in a shelter. Looked kind of like a bus shelter with a bench. At night I sat up awake, paced a lot to keep warm. I felt very vulnerable there in the dark alone. Every morning I'd go off to school and then go back to the park. I wore makeup to mask my black eyes and told my teachers I'd had an accident in Taekwondo and wore long sleeves to hide the bruises and scratches. After school, I'd nap in a sunny spot in the park. Honestly, it was peaceful there. I felt safer in the park than I had at home in years. I also had 2 sleepovers with friends during this week. I didn't tell them I was sleeping rough. I hadn't even told them about my home life. So yeah, after 5 nights at the park and 2 nights at friends' houses, I was told my mom had left and moved somewhere else. I came back home, and I didn't tell anyone that I hadn't been staying at friends' houses for all of that week. My dad never acknowledged what happened and continued to fight for the marriage for a while. I don't blame him, though. I have to remember that he had been the victim of domestic abuse from my mother for years at that point. All in all, it was cold and scary and so tiring, but I found it to be peaceful and so much better than being at home while my mom was there. Story 5. I'm 6. My sister is 4. We decided it seems like a lot more fun to live at my neighbor's house. We tell said neighbor we're living here and never going home. She calls my mother. We wait with anticipation, giggly, excitable. Then we hear a knock at the door. My mother stands in the doorway with all our clothes packed into suitcases, even has a little teddy head sticking out the top for good measure. She says, while she respects our decision and will miss us very much, unfortunately we are never welcome on their side of the fence again. But the very best of luck to us and our new lives. She puts down the suitcases in the hall and closes the door. We made it back before she did. Story 6. I tried to run when I was 11 to 12 years old. I was being infantilized by one parent, forced to grow up too fast by the other, and going through emotional abuse every single day that was enabled. I was neglected to the point that I had to live off of my best friend's lunches, junk food that I found and hid in my bedroom, and fast food. One of my parents was a genuine, narcissistic sociopath. I've been online from a very young age, and really didn't have as much supervision as I should have had. I was planning to run away with someone I had been talking to for years. They were actually a catfish much older than me, and in my heart, I think I knew that it was too good to be true, but I was so ready to just leave everything behind that I didn't care. I just needed a reason to get out of my house, since I didn't have the guts to kill myself. My running away was planned down to the nearest detail. I didn't skimp on anything. I spent over 6 months planning my escape. I knew all the harsh realities of running away. Homelessness, literally needing to fend for yourself, and I fully accepted them. I don't think I understood just how many bad people there were out there, and I literally thought that human trafficking was people getting hit by cars. But once again, it was all worth it for a new life. I researched how to steal things so that I would have enough to eat, should I ever need it, and how to live on the streets. I thought about how I would keep warm in the blistering winters and keep cool in the sweltering heat. I took note of places I could stay. I stole a small amount of money off my parents' dresser to top up what I already had of my own. I was going to completely change my appearance, go by a completely different name, and I practiced being that person for around an hour almost every single night. I've never had to sleep all that much, so I planned to use that to my advantage and make my way to another part of Canada overnight. Whether that was on foot, by bus, by train, whatever it took. I even got a little ahead of myself and thought maybe I could smuggle myself into the United States or, somehow, without a passport, take a plane to England. The further away I was from home, the better. I was ready to leave everything and everyone behind. I had only the bare essentials on my back. I never made it all that far. I had slipped out of the house multiple times to try my hand at yet another escape, and no one knew. And something in me always made me go back. If I had succeeded, it would have literally been a case of here today, gone tomorrow. No one ever suspected I might never be in their lives again. As an adult now, a small part of me wishes I would have completely gone through with it. Things have gotten better, but only to a point. I am a mentally ill wreck with struggles I'll literally never overcome, and I know part of it has to do with the fact that I had to grow up in that shit show. I'm not as naive as I was, obviously. The dangers of the world are much greater than 11 to 12-year-old me could ever know or understand. Human trafficking is not people getting hit by cars, and I don't think anyone is truly prepared to be homeless. I'd still do it. I don't feel anything when I look back at this point in my life. Like most of my childhood, I prefer to just sort of forget about it and pretend that it was normal. I would be sad today if I left everything and everyone behind, but it sounds horrible, but I feel like it would be worth it. I just wanted, and want, a second chance at the life I never got. I wish I was someone else with someone else's life. Story 7. It was about 2 months after my 17th birthday. I was living at my dad's and his girlfriend at the time. Ever since I moved to his place, we had little fights, almost daily. Didn't bother me one bit. I guess I was used to it. One day it got out of hand, though. Me and his girlfriend were having a fight, and when I said something along the lines of, "I now understand why your own son didn't even want to live with you," which obviously crossed a line. Her son used to live with us until he moved to his dad at around 14. She then spilled a literal boiling cup of coffee into my face. I almost lost it and wanted to hit her, but I saw my father's face. He was cool with everything. He probably thought she was right throwing that shit into my face. I just wiped it off and left the apartment to go to my place. I had my own apartment in the house my dad lived in, 2 stories above his apartment. I grabbed my phone and a backpack, calling my grandmother while putting everything that I needed and could carry into my backpack. My grandmother heard me out and immediately said I could come to her and stay there. I left the same hour with no intention of coming back. About 2 days later, I got a SMS from my dad asking me where I am. 2 days later, I told him, and he said I had a week to get all my stuff. So I called up my 3 best friends from school, and we took everything that we could fit inside of moving boxes and sent it to my grandparents with a taxi. I then threw my keys into the mailbox of my dad and left. 2 weeks after that, my savings account, where I had saved about 4,000 euros since I was 12, was completely wiped. Talked to my dad about 2 or 3 times after that to get my mail, and haven't made any effort to see/talk to him since. That was 4 years ago. I still live with my grandparents, and besides struggling with addiction and money problems, everything is wonderful. Story 8, 6 years old. Didn't want to go to gymnastics class. Hated flipping upside down. It scared me every time. A janitor found me an hour later, napping in the pew of our church, and returned me to my mother. My mother then called the police and thanked them, and called off the search. This is serious. It really happened, and I apologize in advance if anyone's offended if it's not in keeping with the tone of other replies.